So hello, greetings on this beautiful sunny day. My name's Vanessa Norwood and I'm Creative Director of the Building Centre. And these are our sustainability sessions, the Building Centre's new series of talks that explore aspects of sustainability in the built environment. So our first set of talks celebrates retrofit projects that aim to reduce carbon emissions while giving existing buildings new life. The second retrofit talk is on the David Brownlow Theatre with Jonathan Tuckey Design. And the new theatre is in the grounds of Horace Hill School in South East England and is true to Jonathan Tuckey Design Studio's commitment to building on the built, for which it has earned an international reputation. The theatre is a masterclass in repairing and enhancing with a new sustainable building carefully crafted to sit in concert with the neighbouring buildings. The design uses natural materials to create a passively ventilated theatre sited within the wooded setting of the campus. It's constructed of cross-laminated timber frame, and its specifications has ensured a saving of 40 tonnes of CO2 compared to traditional blockwork. The team worked in collaboration with Webb Yates engineers, and it's my pleasure today to be talking to Jonathan Tuckey, who is director and founder of Jonathan Tuckey Design. And the varying ways of spaces and places can be reused and remodeled has been a constant area of interest for Jonathan's practice and a recurring theme during his extensive teaching experience. The Jonathan Tuckey Design Studio has become expert in designing contemporary designs with layers of built heritage to explore the ways in which old and new can coexist and elevate one another. So it's my great pleasure to hand over to you, Jonathan, and say thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Vanessa. It's very nice to be here again on a beautiful day. Hopefully, if I share my screen, you can see in a minute my... Is that working all right, Vanessa? Great.
Perfect.
So I feel a bit of a fraud. We're sort of showing this under the banner of Retrofit, and despite that being very much the nature of the work that we've done in the studio, this isn't an alteration to existing building. It is, in fact, a new theatre. And so therefore I thought, when I spotted this on the title yesterday, I thought I'd explain this new building as a building that's been made from many other buildings, a collection of references or existing spaces and ideas. And so I went through our precedent folder. In every project we do in the studio, we have a precedent folder, and it's kind of like a collective diary for us in the studio, the things that inspire us, the things that we're interested in becoming the kind of the driver for the project. And I kind of did a raid through this folder, and I thought this would be a good way to describe our intentions for this building. So this is the site. It's as Vanessa said, it's a school, a boarding school in southeast England, a cluster of buildings on the top of a small hill surrounded by woodland. So buildings within which you can learn, sleep, pray, exercise. There's a classroom, a gym, a dormitory, a chapel. And early discussions for us was the precedent for this to be a kind of monastery type building, a monastery type group of buildings, or is it more like a city? And we felt that actually a school isn't insular like a monastery. It was an outward looking institution. It's preparing people for sending them out into the world and furnishing them with sort of the experiences that they will encounter later in life. So for us, the kind of representation of a civic thinking of the collection of buildings that were actually quite ad hoc in their nature as having a civic dimension was inspiring to us. So these images of the ideal city, both in painting by Fra Carnevale on the left and in Pienza and a model of Florence on the right, these sort of notions of what makes up an ideal city were important for us in terms of how we would bring a new building into our context. I suppose we thought of viewing the campus, we wanted each of the buildings to have their own civic identity, their civic responsibility, but also to have some autonomy whilst they would have had some autonomy, we wanted them to have a sense of collectivity. So we looked at the space between the buildings, the alignments from one building to another, and we were interested in how they would be linked by some surface or some grouping. So these are models of the scheme in the campus, the group of buildings that existed, and the new theatre that was placed very much in the centre of the collection of buildings that we sort of thought of as a small city or a town. We spoke of it as thinking of it as bringing a sort of theatrical stability to the town on the hill. Adding a theatre to a town, in our mind, made it more like a town. It had a more of an urban quality, and so the exact location we chose of it was very much about bringing the two sides of the community together. The sides, the left and right hand side of the campus, were brought together around this new building, and its exact positioning, I guess, was considered not only for acting as a locus in the middle, but also something that would create axes from one building to another, to it, towards it, and through it, and in front of it was created this new kind of square, that what started to become a civic square in the center of the school, a place bookended by this portico around which a kind of a group of people could gather on the edge of the other buildings that formed the boundary to it. This was another precedent that was early in our minds at the beginning of placing the theatre. This is a plan for Pienza in Tuscany, in the province of Siena, and it was one of the sort of earliest pieces of Renaissance town planning. In about 1400, the architect Bernardo Gambarelli was sort of responsible for the planning of this, and we very much like the way the cathedral teeters on the edge of the landscape at the north of it, and then forms this piazza in the middle. And we also were quite struck, I remember, by the three palazzo around it, the Pretorio, the Piccolini, and the Vescovile, the way that you never really got a complete facade of them, the way they slipped past the cathedral. And so there was always a sense of these civic buildings never being seen in a complete form and somehow being masked by another, and forming these tapering spaces on either side of the piazza. So this is the sort of first models of the proposal, where it started to have its place in a newly formed urban square in the school, one that had a sort of wide opening and then tapered as it went further down. And that axes of the theatre we chose to make the axes of the theatre very much in alignment with these other classroom buildings and music school buildings, so that there became axes through the campus, so that the theatre could be seen from here and seen to bring the orientation of one side of the campus to the other side. A new theatre is always going to be a very, very large volume, particularly in a space that is mainly of smaller buildings like existed around us. The combination of a stage and auditorium, very much we're always going to create a big figure in the campus or in the town. And for us, that was going to present sort of challenges and opportunities. We were excited by, as I said on those previous slide, the way a kind of single facade could be concealed or made incomplete. So the sort of symmetry could be concealed or almost slip past or behind other buildings. It's giving a kind of almost a brooding presence of a large civic building, together with its piazzas and campos and its sort of ancillary spaces that formed very much a relationship with the city. So these these churches, both called San Lorenzo. On the left, one is in Venice. It's the birthplace. Is actually where Marco Polo is buried. But that sense of a building that you can see you're aware of what its whole size is, but it is in some way masked, and you can read it beyond the facades of the buildings that are on either side of it. And on the left, in Florence, this fantastic Brunelleschi church, also San Lorenzo. And looking at these, not only were we interested in thinking about how the scale of the theatre would interact with the buildings around it, we were also quite inspired by how a single material could be used on a building of such scale, and how one would work with that material to both subdivide it, to bring a layering to it, at the same time as had something that was quite monolithic about the way it was used. So this is two views of the theatre with that context in mind. The kind of first, on the right, is the first approach you get to it from the arrival at the school, and it's the full facade of it being masked by the buildings that are on the right hand side of it, and the sense of the civic square being something that you are aware of as being there, but you kind of get drawn into. And then on the other side of the building, it's very much framed by the landscape and framed by trees. So again, this kind of large brooding presence of a big volume is concealed, or at least framed by the landscape, the buildings and the trees around it. The school itself had this sort of quite theatrical rooftops on one side of it, but the side that we had decided to place the theatre was slightly lower level, and didn't have much to distinguish it from anything above a story and a half. We definitely felt the kind of presence and sort of the excitement of perhaps building a tower to the theatre, something that would act as a marker that could be seen from further away from the theatre itself. This is, I'm sure everyone knows the building on the left. It's the best church in London, in my view. It's Mary's Woolnoth by Hawksmoor. Ian Nairn, who's written about his great book on London, about the buildings he loved in London, he said of it, "You don't remember until afterwards how strange the building is." And I think it's a really spot on, as everything he writes it's spot on description of the building. I think the way the tower is separate from the church behind it, the actual main nave behind it, this kind of the square space behind it, was quite interesting to us, and the way it acted as a pivot point to I forget the name of the roads. I think King William Street and Lombard Street, but it acts as this sort of node, and I think something of that tower was something that we were interested in reminding ourselves of when we came to look at the theatre. And then this wonderful group of people in Fellini's film 8½, heading towards these scaffolded structures, just being drawn towards the lights and the excitement and the events that would be there. And I think there's something of the theatricality of providing a kind of place around which to orientate oneself at the front of a theatre. So this was our gate, our kind of campanile, I suppose, a bit like a bell tower. At times it was going to be a bit taller and a bit narrower, but it very much became the portico at the front of the theatre. We think of it as an object for the town that can be seen all around to announce the arrival of the theatre in the campus and I suppose on the curriculum in a way. Previously, the theatre had been in the gym, and so it hadn't had drama, hadn't had that the presence in the curriculum as the new staff and head teacher wanted it to have. And I guess as the closer you got to it, the facade you see starts to mark and form an kind of presence on that civic square that's in front of it. and become a place for events or people to gather in itself, rather than necessarily everything needing to happen within the theatre, a place to kind of gather under or gather around. Even thought of it potentially as a place, a structure around which a school game or something might end up manifesting the traditions of. But it's also used as the place, a billboard for which the school play. This banner, a banner can be hauled up on the two frames on the right to announce the school play, or to announce the arrival back to school or end of term. So it's sort of in every way a marker in this part of the campus. Wow, these are fantastic buildings. Well, Voisey on the left, and that's a building. The building on the left is Broadleys by Voisey. It's no coincidence that this kind of massive overhanging roofs and big express gutters have to be built in the wettest part of England. So that's on the edge of the Lake District in Windermere. And the Red House, or Red House by Philip Webb down in southeast London. And I think, as well as these Italian references, we were talking a lot and we're interested in the way a building can, on its facade, have an expression and depth, a place that people could kind of gather and watch the rain tipping off the roofs, a place with perhaps expressed awnings or cloisters or overhangs. A place that you didn't have to necessarily be in the theatre or using the theatre to get use out of. And so in our case, the building, the timber building, was clad in this Varrock, a kind of cement board. And so the width of the fins, and the fins then frame louvers, which, as Vanessa said, house the natural ventilation, effectively allow the air to come in at low level and out at high level in it. And then over doorways there are canopies, and then even the expressed gutters, sort of exaggerated as they kick out from the top of the building and bring water down in kind of large pipes and just tip it out into land drains at the bottom of the building. And there was something about that expression of people being able to sort of occupy and be held by the facade of the building. These two buildings are by a Danish architect, 20th century Danish architect called Hans Christian Hansen. There's a quote that we often use in the office about things need to be ordinary and heroic at the same time. And this is a quote by either Peter or Alison Smithson. It's always attributed to both of them. And I'm always taken by that idea of being ordinary and heroic at the same time. And these buildings certainly, these buildings in Denmark seem to absolutely deliver upon that. The everyday kind of simplicity and yet monumentality of that, the materiality, was very beautiful to us. And I think something we also took from these is they were very tectonic about how they were put together. You could somehow screw them, you could unscrew them, you could see how they were built in observing them. The fixings were all visible, the layering of substructure, superstructure, and then facade was clear to see. And I think that there's something that appealed to the almost the childlike nature of construction, and how we felt that was quite an important element to have in this building, so that it might be able to be undressed by people looking at it and understood by people looking at it. And I guess that was very much the nature of how we were trying to work with the materials that we were using. There was something in our mind quite theatrical about wrapping a timber building in this sort of cement and timber board, but all the panels were, you could see the fixings of them, and you could see the substructure through them, and you can look up behind the louvers and understand how that is all working and arranged. And even the foundation, that the pupils are sitting there at the end, there's kind of something quite clear about its expression, giving it a kind of the building a rhythm and a three-dimensionality. I was surprised when we looked in our precedent folder that there weren't many plans in there, and but this cracker was in there, and I remember why we were talking about it. This was the Half Moon Theatre by Florian Bagel in East London, and we were quite interested in the balance between the asymmetrical and the symmetrical, the fact that it creates these quite formal spaces, and yet provides this quite loose, baggy circulation around them, and that seemed to produce a tension that we felt, I think, was going to be quite relevant and quite suitable for how we were going to work with the theatre. And so this is our plan. You can see the sort of sequence of spaces from portico, foyer, wrapping up around the side of the building and then into the main space. So it has a sort of, it has an adjunct symmetricality about it, something that is sort of pure and then gets corrupted by the adjacencies of other spaces. And then at the rear of it, this is the amphitheatre that uses these doors from the main stage out to the back. These were, well, this kind of German weather house on the left. It's actually called Kuckucksuhr, and it's located in the Black Forest. And I think the fact that facade it can be occupied by in this case animated people who come out and announce the weather, but that we knew that the building around the building we were creating was always going to be animated by a community of people of all sizes, and that there was something about the scale of that appealed to us, as did this this rood screen from Ripon Cathedral. The figures framed, both small and large figures framed within the structure of the building, held and yeah, within the building, somehow becoming part of that facade. So on the left, you've got the south facade is the boundary, I guess, between the city and the landscape. It's the place where the amphitheatre is, and the doors, stage left and stage right, and the enlarged concrete foundation are the only gestures that end up making that an auditorium, albeit there's some banked seating in the foreground. And then you can see the sort of fins of the building just becoming a sort of natural way in which people can gather, and they almost can wear the building like the high backs of a kind of ecclesiastical cloak. Looking in the interior, we were quite interested in something that had an intensity about it. So a sort of single materiality was something that was quite early on in the images that we were inspired by. These kind of great big barns, or on the left is a mead hall, a feasting hall, place for sort of people to greet the Germanic king. But I think for us, I think the way actually providing some light into it, occasional bits of light that could be then shut off for a theatre, would in itself provide both the usability for assemblies and for drama classes when you didn't need complete darkness, but also brought a degree of light onto the structure and the atmosphere around it. And this is some pictures of the interior. So the timber, it's just a CLT building, and it's the CLT is exposed, and the only thing that's layered on top of it is a kind of lining, like a tracery of battens that act as a kind of a proportioning system, but at the same time as doing something towards improving the flat acoustics of a singular material. And you can see in places around the perimeter at the top, windows were cut in, allowing light to be able to come in during the day, and then those are sort of simple manual shutters that can swing around and close off those windows when the theatre's in its black box mode. We talked a lot with the head teacher actually about whether the seating should be removable or retractable, and the theatre have another use, or whether it should have sort of permanence about it. And he and we were both very convinced that this needed to be something permanent about the topography on which you occupied, something quite unnerving about the seat you always sit in suddenly coming in and not being there. And so these images, particularly of the Swiss set designer called Adolf Appia on the right, these fantastic stage sets he did, but just setting out what that landscape might be like for people to sit on and occupy, something that perhaps in our mind when we were designing the theatre could have perhaps been there before the theatre building dropped on top of it, or might indeed be there afterwards, if the building was taken away. And that this is a sketch we did early on about that relationship between the kind of the rate seating, the landscape on which people sat, and its connection to the wider landscape of paths and routes through the school, and it being very much one and the same of those, and that the sort of accessibility of the building was very much a kind of continuation of the routes around the campus. I found these were also in the present folder. Just we were quite interested in approaching, as you approached the theatre from the entrance hall, that you'd get this side light through, and the reflectivity on the material which is on the floor would have something that would draw you towards draw you into the interior, and almost we quite like the idea that there would be times when your eyes would need to adjust to the lighting on the interior. And this is the view. Forgive the sample written on the image on the left. I couldn't find our real copy of it, but yeah, that light that is cast across the cement board floor as you kind of walk into the theatre from one side to the other. So that door that door on the left hand side functions as the entrance that the pupils use when it's not in theatre mode. So if you're coming for class or for an assembly, we felt that you could have a kind of more immediate door, and that the theatre entrance might be off a foyer and have something a little bit more celebratory around the sense of arrival into the space. These are drawings by Alvar Aalto of working out the acoustics of a ceiling that he was installing in a library in Finland called in a city called Viipuri City Library, and just this curvaceous undulating ceiling that would reflect and bounce the noise of the speaker perfectly into the auditorium. And clearly with small voices, pupils, young people in this relatively big space, we wanted to make sure that we were going to get that acoustics right. And so we worked with charcoal blue on that kind of acoustic, well, in a lot of the theatrical elements of the building, but in particular, one element was the acoustics, and this undulating ceiling on the top was devised and designed so that the sort of sound of a small voice could be heard at the back row, but equally when there was a large group performing kind of in multiple voices, that the acoustic paneling and the baffling on the side worked to that end. Our early iterations of theatre wasn't actually in its current form. It was going to be a theatre in the round. We really wanted. We'd looked a lot at Elizabethan theatre, and we quite liked the idea that perhaps the loss of the perfect view of the stage was going to be replaced with this communal experience, that where you could sort of see the community around you as much as what was on the stage. But budget and size and other things got in the way. But these images were things that we were talking about, the Wanamaker Fit Theatre on the part of the Globe, and Aldo Rossi's Teatro del Mundo, with this fantastic 2 layers of space that looked at two galleries that looked down to the space beneath it. But the only thing that remained of that in the end was this this minstrels gallery that we ended up having on one side, a space from which sort of somewhere halfway between stage and auditorium, somewhere which could be appropriated by the actors, but equally appropriated by late coming audience members. So, and it, to us, it sort of produced and provided an informality to the theatre that broke down the kind of binary relationship between audience member and an actor, and provide this sort of triangular relationship, which I think we were pleased that we hadn't lost. The final reference then was when we came to look at the sort of furniture and how we were going to do the seating. This beautiful space is in the basement lecture theatre in the Mackintosh Art School by Charles Rennie Mackintosh. We really were interested in this sort of singularity, the communality, I suppose, of the benches in comparison to seats. The fact that you're all in it together in a sense. It was a kind of collective experience, but somehow seemingly made out of one material, I think was quite interesting to us. But then there were these small elements of curvaceousness to the seat base and the frame at the top that were sort of a gesture towards comfort and articulation in the lecture theatre. And these were the benches that were made also out of CLT, but sort of this time a sort of 18 or 25mm one, but all CNC cut and then assembled on site, and then all the people's names and such like carved into them as part of the language of the theatre and its sort of graphic representation. And that's the final slide for all the fantastic people in the studio and who've now not in the studio who worked on the project. We won it in 2016, and it was finished late last year. So it's not unusual in projects that last for 4.5 years that it gets sort of passed from one hand to another hand, and these references and precedents that it was nice to go through and find again really came out of the ideas and conversations that we all had in making the building. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was a really very beautiful presentation and a great set of references, which I'm sure we all really enjoyed. I should say that anyone's free to ask a question. I'm not sure if you can see me, but yes, I think there I go. Spring back into life. Yeah, thank you so much. I had a question for you, Jonathan, and you're right. We did bend the retrofit rules to fit you in, because not to have you in a series about retrofitting when you've been so ahead of the curve, I think, with the conversation with building on the built would have been remiss of us. And I wanted to ask, with that in mind, about your first moves in retrofit and your first thoughts about the conversation. You did teach with Fred Scott, who is the author of the seminal On Altering Architecture. He must have been influential. How did your interest in building on the built begin?
You're spot on. It was Fred, really. I studied with him at Kingston as an interior designer. He was teaching the interior design course there, and that was the theory on which they set up all their projects. Really was building on the built. It was essentially working with something that existed and how to alter it, and it was armed with that I set off into practice and to the projects that we first got asked to do. And they tended to all have that in common, which was there was something to start with and an ambition of how to collaborate with it. And I actually think that it is the normal path for a lot of people into practice is those types of projects. It's particularly if you live in Europe, we have a lot of buildings around and they need to be changed to suit us. So in some respects, it's not unusual. I suppose what was a bit more unusual about the way we approached it is that we were so determined to stick in that territory for so long because we were interested in it. And I think in what you're right in saying is that it's now become more of a topic that people are interested in its own right, rather than just a stepping stone into tabula rasa.
Yes, it's definitely increasing in importance, isn't it? Rightly so, as a subject. Most of the comments that are coming in actually are congratulations to you, Jonathan. So Valerie says, a fantastic building and approach to design, many thanks. Margot says, beautiful talk, thanks. Someone is asking about this, obviously the materiality really comes through. I mean, it's incredible. just, I mean, seeing the pictures, you get the kind of warmth and attention to detail in the materiality. How did you experiment? How did you sort of decide which materials to go for, and how are they standing the test of time? I guess they haven't had much time yet to weather.
They haven't had a much amount of time. Well, CLT, it was, well, we were keen, particularly Peter, who was a project architect at the time, Peter Youthard, was very keen that we did this as a CLT building for lots of reasons. I think there was an environmental angle, but also the sort of practicality of trying to build something quite quickly in a context like that school. So that was sort of in place quite early on. The exterior, there were a number of different iterations of it. And we were being pushed and pulled around by the constraints of budget, and we came across Varrock. We'd done a project with Valcromat, which is Varrock's sort of indoor version, and we had done a project with that, and we liked the people and we liked the material a lot, and I think there was some of it lying around in the sample box, and it became a sort of initially a sketch thought, and then suddenly it started to become a reality. And they only do 5 or 6 colors, and that red, something sort of reminiscent of a sleeping dragon, I remember being talked about in the studio at the time, but we couldn't quite work out if we felt it was right to do an entire building at red. It felt at that time completely, it felt quite a big decision to make, but looking back on it now, it feels absolutely right. In a campus that's almost entirely brick or clay hung tiles, it feels like a sort of a natural evolution of that materiality that exists. How it works, I don't know. It already has a sort of patina to it, naturally has a patina to it, so it's not unforgiving in how it started out its life. It already, I think the client initially thought, ooh, is that meant to have this sort of difference from one panel to another? And we reassured them that it was meant to have that. And I think that's going to stand it well, because it's already got that. So we're not trying to go from perfect to imperfect. It's already got an imperfection, which we quite like about it.
Yes, I mean, yes, I think the project has this sort of feel that it's been there for much longer than it has. And I think the sort of the references that you used really sort of, I think it feels like it sort of has this rich history, which makes sense now, having seen your very beautiful references. I'm afraid we've run out of time now. I think everyone has about sort of 20 minutes to rush out and get a sandwich before they have to get back to work. So just a really big thank you, Jonathan, for sharing that journey and the beautiful finished project with us. Anyone watching can find out more about Building on the Built on the website, and you also do a sort of a cultural program to sort of inform thinking around retrofit, which is great. The building.
Yes, we have Dow Jones talking in hopefully in September. That's the plan. Is the first live event will be back in September.
Brilliant. Well,
please come to that.
To hearing more about what you have planned. We're open now at the Building Centre, so everyone can come along and see our conversations about climate change exhibition and have a coffee. And this talk will be up on YouTube along with the other talks in our previous woodwork series. And you can follow the Building Centre on Insta and Twitter to find out more about the next in the series. So yeah, huge thank you, Jonathan. That was a very pleasurable way to spend a Wednesday lunchtime. Nice to talk to you, and we look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.